And before I hand over the mic to you, I had watched another interview where you had explained your thoughts like this. You said, let's say I go out to dinner and I tip the waitress. The waitress takes a taxi home and she tips the taxi driver. The taxi driver takes the tip money and puts gas in his car. In that example, my $1 tip had a velocity of 3, the waitress tip, the taxi tip, and the gasoline. So my $1 produces a velocity of 3. My $1 produces $3 of goods and services. That's velocity. But what if I stay home, don't go out, and don't spend any money? So then your money has no traction. But as we're coming out of this pandemic, we're in an economic recovery, Jim. Would you not say that it's a different situation today?
No, the situation is the same. Actually, in some ways worse. In any debate, Danielle, between inflation and deflation, or any subject for that matter, the first thing I always insist on is we have to agree on our definitions. We have to agree on our terms. We don't have to agree on policy or outlook or forecast or anything else. But if we can't agree on the definitions, then we're kind of we're talking past each other, and it's kind of a waste of time. So let's define inflation. It sounds like everyone knows what inflation is. Actually, no. If you're talking about consumer prices, and that is the definition I use because that's the definition the Federal Reserve uses. And if you're trying to forecast policy, maybe you can disagree with them, but if you're thinking differently than they are, then you're not going to know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, but you need to know what they're doing. So they look at consumer prices. There are 10 different measures. There's the CPI, the CPI core, something called PCE, personal consumption expenditure deflator. We don't have to get too bad. There are 10 different measures, but they're all about prices you pay for stuff. So milk and bread at the store, gasoline at the pump, medical costs, tuition, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I mean by inflation. That's what the Federal Reserve thinks. Now, there is this Austrian School of Economics, and they say they count asset prices as inflation. So stock prices, Bitcoin for that matter, gold, silver, land, et cetera. And they say, look, that's inflation. The stock market's at an all-time high, et cetera. Well, that's not my definition. Now, if you count asset price inflation increases as inflation, then we're sort of talking past each other. Now, I do agree that there are bubbles. I think the stock market's a bubble. I think other bubbles are forming. I certainly think Bitcoin's a bubble. But that's not, and it's kind of, if you want to call it inflation, that's fine. But if we're going to have a debate, I'm talking about consumer prices. Now, when you talk about consumer prices, there is no inflation. It doesn't exist. And immediately someone says, well, I just fill up my car with gas and it was $3.50. It used to be $2.20. Okay, you're right. But the price of technology, the price of computers, the price of tuition, the price of a lot of things, price of clothing, et cetera, have all come down and continue to come down. So all of these indices, they're baskets. It's like, well, you spend a certain amount on clothes, a certain amount on computers, iPhones, tuition, et cetera. And they look at the basket. There's no inflation in the basket. There just isn't. If you want to pick a particular thing, gasoline at the pump is a good one. Yeah, okay, I get it. I put gas in my car, but there's no inflation. Now, if you want to talk about asset bubbles, to me that's a completely different subject.
I think the feedback after our last talk, I think most people were referring to consumer prices, and like you rightfully said, the first thing they said, well, doesn't Jim go and pump his gas? Doesn't Jim buy milk and toast?
Yeah, I do, and I also buy clothes, and they're practically giving them away. So if you want to, there's selective perception. People pick one thing, and again, gas at the pump is real. I mean, like I said, I put gas in my car, and if that's all you're thinking about, but that's not an index. That's one good. Tuition prices are dropping. Healthcare prices are dropping. Clothing prices are dropping. Technology prices are dropping, et cetera. And people ignore all those things like they deserve it, like it's a gift, and focus on the one or two things that are going up. I mean, I'm not making it up to you. I mean, look at the indices. Go to the Department of Commerce in the United States and look at the Bureau of Economic Affairs and look at their PCE core deflator or CPI. They're all they're either down or flat. They're not going up.
So when Jerome Powell says we will see transitory inflation, what is your response?
Well, you have to, what does he mean? He's talking about base effects, meaning, so we're now entering, we're in the second quarter, okay? What happened in the second quarter of 2020? The U.S. economy went down 31%. It was the greatest drop since, greatest quarterly drop on an annualized basis in history. And for the year, it was the greatest drop since 1946. So when you have an economy like that, and then you come into 2021, when they measure inflation, what are they actually saying? Well, they have the basket of goods and services, but they're looking at it either month over month, or they're looking at a month year over year. So they're comparing, for example, April 2021 to April 2020. So a monthly data series on a year over year basis. If that's your comparison, yeah, inflation is going to go up, but that's only because the bottom fell out last year. You have to look at the base, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, I fell in a 50-foot hole, I climbed out 10 feet. I'm still at 40 feet in the hole. So yeah, so what he was saying is that in the coming months, you're going to see some upticks in some of those indices. That's true, but that's in comparison with the worst year since 1946. And so that's to be expected. My question is, where are we in the fourth quarter? Where are we in early 2022 rather, when the economy was recovering? For that matter, it recovered in the third quarter of 2020. Those base effects are going to go away. So he's talking about 3 months. The reason is not because prices are skyrocketing. It's because we're comparing it to a collapse